I think it's just a lovely place. Very, very open, very friendly. It's just a great city to live in.
There's just so much going on culturally in Glasgow, which makes it a fantastic city to live in, and it's affordable.
I love the fact that within 3/4 of an hour you can be out, at Loch Lomond, you've got the mountains. I think Glasgow as well, it's sort of not massive, it's not too big, it's just the right size for a city.
I think some of the communities that we have and the way those communities are real they're doing things from the grassroots, they're doing things that are interesting, that are organic.
There's loads of things to do. There's ballet, there's film, there's theatre, there's great nightclubs, there's great pubs. There's no end of things to do, The only thing I don't like is the weather. It's the only thing.
Unfortunately, one of the observations I make in Glasgow is that there is a considerable problem with litter.
The littering that takes place amounts to about 250 million items being littered across Scotland every year. And to give that some local relevance, that's about 50 kelpies worth of litter, or 15,000 tonnes of materials.
Well, our surveys are showing that over 80% of streets have litter on them. So if I stood in 80% of places in Scotland and turned around, there'd be litter around me. 1 in 6 streets have dog fouling on them. So I would be really surprised if someone said there wasn't a litter issue in Scotland.
There's always patches of Glasgow, always, especially in big housing estates. You can see a lot of litter, and you can see, pockets of the city centre, especially after pubs close and the takeaway places close, you can see that litter is gathering in those areas. So there's areas that are okay, and other areas that really need some serious attention.
I think there are some very litter-strewn areas. The further out you go, in areas with more waste ground, wasteland, with areas of wasteland, litter builds up there.
I do live next to Hampden, and it's absolute massacre after any event. And buckfast, the beer cans, this and that, just all over, scattered all over the gardens. That's not fair. We have to live here. You just pass there for a gig and then back, and you have to tidy it all up afterwards.
Fly tipping, we don't see a lot of it in this immediate area, but I do know that it's a bigger issue at the tenements. A lot of the problems were created in the back closes and the back alleyways, where people were illegally dumping large quantities.
You walk around the streets, you see rubbish, discarded bottles, drinks cans, etc. Also just people dumping bulky items, mattresses, furniture, just dumped in the street or dumped in a lane.
I've seen nappies, mattresses. I think a children's toy that had just been discarded that obviously was beyond its use, prams, all sorts of stuff just dumped.
Today, driving back home, I found a Tesco trolley in the Swales, which is a channel for floodwater in case it's very heavy rain, and 2 Zimmers.
Traffic cones are very popular to find anywhere. People just seem to pick up a traffic cone, just play with it a bit, and then just toss it somewhere.
There's been all sorts of items of discarded clothing, shoes, television sets, fitness equipment, beds, wardrobes. Almost complete houses sometimes make their way out onto the street.
People's old pants, single shoes, all sorts of bit of prams, all sorts of things, yeah. And the more you see it look into bushes, for example, the more horrible things you may find.
From pogo sticks to prosthetic limbs.
Coca-Cola tins, iron brew tins, empty bottles, Lucozade bottles, sports isotonic drinks, coffee cups, fast food packaging.
Disposable hygiene products and plastics and packaging and wrappings and glass and all sorts of things all the way to pretty much building materials, because there are small sort of businesses that don't have the license to get rid of all of their building materials.
So we definitely have issues. We're a dirty city, a messy city.
We're finding that the litter problem in Scotland is getting worse every single year. We've got a team of surveyors who go out and survey over 14,000 streets, and they're finding that local environmental quality indicators such as litter, dog fouling and fly tipping are all getting worse across the board. Local environmental quality is at its worst it has been in over a decade, and unfortunately it's getting worse at a steeper rate in our most deprived communities.
I can't recall litter being as big an issue 20 years ago or 30 years ago as it appears to be now.
I wouldn't say it was necessarily worse now, but it's just something it's a constant. There's a constant level of litter.
Yeah, I remember people just throwing things out the front door. Or people that grew up in a tenement, so people would just throw things into the backyard and kids just played on it. I can remember playing with old prams and just rubbish.
When we were children, I mean, I'm talking a long time ago, but when we were children there wasn't the same litter, and I've heard somewhere recently it was since the 80s, and that to me has been the increase in the fast food outlets. You know, people didn't eat on the street. I mean, my kids think it's quite funny that I won't walk and eat. I just can't do it. I just won't do it. But there's been a huge increase, and I think that's where it comes from. People actually, don't sit down anymore. They eat stuff on the go. They have coffee cups on the go, and I think that's probably contributed massively to it.
We see this increase in food on the move culture and people walking around with single-use plastic, single-use paper, and are struggling to discard it properly, whether that be because of the infrastructure in place or whether that's just because they don't realise that they can actually take it home and deal with it themselves.
What we know about littering behaviour is that it's very context specific. So a person might litter in one situation or scenario but not in another. We know that also half the population will actually admit to littering, and that could be through deliberately littering, or it could be accidentally littering something, or simply not thinking about it as well. So things like banana skins, we quite often hear about people dropping those. We see them out on the streets and in our countryside, but that is littering as well.
I think there's a mindset among people in Glasgow that you can just throw it away, and if it's out of your sight, then it's out of mind. You don't need to worry about it. There's a feeling that you can leave it to the council to sort it out. It's not really your responsibility.
I think the biggest cause is the behaviour, is the values that lead people to leave stuff dumped in the street. I think most people recognise that it's not acceptable to leave your rubbish lying effectively in somebody else's neighbourhood, in somebody else's space. Most people would accept that's not acceptable. Some people don't. Some people think that for whatever reason that it's okay for them to leave stuff. That might be because they think they'll get away with it. There's not enough sense of enforcement that action is going to be taken.
Sometimes, it's about a lack of convenience of bins. It's about people's mood and how they're feeling. If people are not feeling great about themselves and their purpose, often they'll do things that are damaging to the local environment.
It just seems like people's attitudes are just, it's not really my property, so I'm not really that fussed.
You wouldn't do it in your own house. In fact, I'm convinced that a lot of it's people who wouldn't do it in their own car, and that's why they're throwing it out of the car, because they don't want their car to be messy, but they're quite happy to drive around in streets that are messy.
My wife has a background as a nursery educator, and her nursery school used to encourage children to not throw packaging around, but then she would come up against the children's parents who didn't really take that message on board and were encouraging their child to throw down the empty bottle. But no, we were told we've got to take it away. Oh well, no, we haven't got anywhere to put it, so just leave it there. Somebody else will clean it up.
We're seeing that at a primary school level, kids are so engaged with the campaigning. They love litter picking, they hate seeing litter about. And there's an issue, there's a phase they go through where something happens that changes how they feel about their environment and how much they want to do to tackle the issue. And we get a lot of complaints in about litter around schools, and that's about school runs, and that's about the infrastructure in place and the bins overflowing, so therefore it's not their problem. So what we really need to do is just, again, make people understand that we all need to take responsibility for this, both educating our kids and our pupils in schools, but also then making sure they're not seeing anyone else do it. Because ultimately they might copy adults who are walking down the street and doing the same thing. So we need everyone across all sectors to take responsibility.
It's a pity that my wife's not here. She stops people in the streets. She stops people in the streets and said, well, you've left something behind. And the irony is 9 times out of 10, they'll actually pick it up. She doesn't get some sort of nasty comment back. They'll actually be quite embarrassed and they will pick it up and they will put it in a bin. So there's something that's not linking up between what they're actually doing. And it does beg the question, is it because they see so much litter that they just find it acceptable? Because they're only adding another piece of litter to what they see as an open trash can, for want of a better word.
We see that litter attracts other littering behaviours. So when an area is already littered, it almost encourages more littering to take place, and the sort of broken window effect.
The bins as well, they seem to be quite small. They easily overflow. The gulls are happily chipping away at everything that's inside and just tossing it out. They quite easily melt based on quite a few sort of disintegrated ones as a plastic puddle on the ground. So, and they don't seem to be emptied as often as needed.
Domestic waste collection works like clockwork. Your bins get emptied on time, every week. There's clear scheduling for it. That doesn't appear to be the case with public litter bins. Now, in this area, we have lamppost bins, which are no bigger than letterbox size. They're like waste paper bins that you would have in a small office. They are repeatedly full. So even if you educate people not to throw the garbage away, it doesn't help that when they go to a bin that it's full. And they're left with, and I've seen it, I've seen litter stacked up on top of bins. Now, it's a windy city at times. That litter's going to go somewhere. It's not going to remain stationary on top of the litter bin.
It may have something to do with council cuts, with general austerity, that cuts to cleansing budgets. But if people just took a bit more responsibility themselves, there would be less of a problem.
In the cities, you get a much more transitory population, and I think people, they kind of pass through quite regularly, and maybe people don't have that same feeling of ownership when they stay in a place a long time, and then they want to kind of, there's a bit more kind of pride and ownership of it. It's not really, this isn't my home, I'm just here for a period of time.
It's also partly to do with the consumerism, that people feel a necessity to walk around with coffee cups, with iron brew, with fast food, and they're quite happy to walk over the streets, and they just seem to have no consideration for what happens with the rubbish thereafter, and it just gets discarded.
We've got the growth of outlets like B&M Bargains and Home Bargains and so on, and they're selling garbage really, which is not it's not going to last, and it gives the illusion that people are consumers. They're targeting the lowest income in society and saying you can buy all this stuff for your children. It's that pressure to buy things for the children, and of course children, it's not necessarily that that it breaks. It could also be that the item, the child just grows out of it. Maybe they never wanted it in the first place, So yeah, it's on the street.
Obviously we have loads of people, rightly so, coming to enjoy a weekend away in the national park. But what they're not doing is being responsible with their kind of disposable campsites. So they're bringing disposable barbecues, they're bringing £5 chairs that they bought at the supermarket and £10 tents that they bought at the supermarket. And they see no value in packing that up and taking it home. So they're just abandoning it on our loch shores.
As I said, people, I think, don't attach the value to the items, and that's in some way because the price we pay for things is artificial, because the cost of actually dealing with those things as waste at the end of their life is not included in the price that the manufacturer is charging individual people.
I don't remember so much plastic as a kid, I remember glass and paper, but there's just so much plastic which is indestructible, you know. So because, you know, for the last 30 years or whatever, we've had single-use plastic. This is why we have a big problem with litter today, because it's plastic that's floating around. Plastic more than paper, glass or tins, it's plastic.
And then obviously there still has to be pressure to the big companies who are still happily producing all of this that cannot be recycled, that can only be either burnt or taken to landfill. So they just seem to not take their share of responsibility.
A lot of common plastics can't be recycled or can only be recycled once and then still end up in the landfill. And we are due to make more plastic in the next 10 years than we've made since 1950. It's not fair to ask the consumer not to buy it because there's often not a choice at the supermarket. It's not fair to blame litter louts because often even the stuff we're putting in our recycling bins is ending up back in the sea. It can't be coped with at recycling plants in the UK or in other countries, and it's being shipped to countries that can't cope with it, and they're then putting it back in the sea because they can't do anything else with it.
There's a bit of research that suggests by, I think, 2050, if we don't make a serious dent, if we don't really change how the economy works, we're going to end up with more plastic than fish by 2050 in the sea.
It's in the water systems, which is very frightening because that's the same water that we end up drinking, and it's not. Plastic never rots; it just breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces that we then drink. Fishes eat it. It's even in the air now. Microplastics in the air, so it's not a problem that goes away.
Litter in the river is not meant to be there. That creates pollution. Plastic waste gets wrapped around animals, but also just ground covering of waste stops plant growing, stops drainage happening in the right way that it should be happening. And as those materials break down, that adds plastic and chemical pollution to the river.
I've seen badger sets, which is basically their sort of community tunnel system where badger clan lives. They're just digging their homes, digging their tunnels in completely littered bank covered in plastic bottles and like female hygiene products, and it's like the poor things are made live there because they have nowhere else to go, and it just all floods every single spring, and it just covers with more and more rubbish. And then you have certain bird species that they kind of run out of nesting material, and then they start bringing litter into their nests. I've seen jackdaw nests covered with, Haribo packets or disposable wipes and things like that. We all noticed that this year the gull problem seems to be particularly bad. It's quite easy to pin down the reason. Their population is supported by so much food. Their food source is getting bigger by probably a year because when you go out early in the morning, there's lots of bin bags. I don't know if they're from households or businesses that have been absolutely torn apart, food scraps inside. Gulls absolutely love that. They don't need to work for their food anymore.
We know that local authorities across Scotland spend about £53 million a year cleaning up after litter and fly tippers, and that's a significant amount of public money that we're wasting on that behaviour.
I think, if our reputation is Glasgow's really lovely place, people are really friendly, but it's filthy, would you go to a city with that reputation? I would think twice about it. So I think it really will spoil things, and I think as well it will start spoiling things for Scotland. I mean, people have always said, come to Scotland, be prepared for the midges. You kind of think, well, you're just going to have to prepare for that. But saying, come to Scotland and watch out for the litter, we're really dependent on tourism, and it'll actually, for me, it would stop people coming.
Scotland is beautiful. One of the biggest draws to Scotland is its environment, both the coastal environment, the green environment, and the mountains, and we can't allow that to degrade. We can't allow people to stop coming to Scotland because it's littered.
Alongside the kind of financial and the sort of environmental damage, we also know that littering can contribute to other forms of crime in the area.
I think litter lying around, as well as things like really overgrown areas, all of that helps to sort of put a bit of fear into people about coming to places because they start to associate it with antisocial behaviour and vandalism. So it gets kind of partnered up with all those other things.
I don't particularly want to walk as much, which is ridiculous because we're trying to actually stop people using their cars. It makes you feel quite nauseous. You kind of wonder as well. I went past the cooperative building today and somebody had obviously taken bin bags, presumably out of their house, and hadn't even put them into the bins. There was bins there, they just left them, so they were ripped open by animals. And goodness knows what, there'll be rats, pigeons, all sorts of vermin round about looking at it. So it's really, really unhealthy apart from anything else.
I mean, you can get into discussions about it attracts vermin and all the rest of it, but at the end of the day, it's unsightly. It's unsightly to see empty plastic bottles, fast food cartons. It's just unsightly. I just don't want that in the environment I live in. And I've had a number of visitors here that are appalled, absolutely appalled. For the overseas visitors saying it's a lovely country you live in, but my God, it's a mess in terms of litter. And if I can clear up the immediate vicinity in which I live, then I'm prepared to do that. Because I find it unsightly. I actually purchased myself a litter grabber and actually go around just my local streets when I've got a spare hour. That, usually speaking, is about once a week, once a fortnight.
Get my hill walking boots on, I get my raincoat on, disposable gloves. I don't actually have a litter picker. I'm not that bothered about having the physical litter picker. I buy a roll of black bags and I just take 2 or 3 black bags with me and I just go out and I just pick the litter.
There was a period that went on for about 3 months that I was picking up 5 or 6 cans of Chocomel on a regular basis. Now, these people must have been leaving their house with a can of Chocomel, getting into their car and ditching it before they drove off, because it was always within the same patch and it was always the same product. I just couldn't believe it. Somebody's actually physically coming out of their house with a drink, getting into their car, and it's the last thing to do before they set the ignition on, chucking the can out the car.
I see my litter pick is an exercise, physical exercise, and that's just part of my fitness programme. So rather than just walk, I walk and pick litter.
Main goal is clearly lead by example, be part of the solution and not part of the problem. And hopefully, and I do get positive people stopping talking to me and saying, "Oh, you're better man than me for doing that." And I said, "Well, if you just did the patch outside your front door, it would be an assistance."
And Friday there, when I was out doing one, this man, he must have been in his 70s, he said, "Oh, you're doing a great job." And I says, "Come out and help me." And he just kind of looked at me, and I went, if you want to come and help me, I'll chat your door and you can come. And he was just astounded. He didn't say yes, he didn't say no, but I don't even think he ever thought that he could go on a litter pick. I says, "I do this every week, come and join me, And he was just like, It's quite a strange reaction, He's just like, why would I want to pick litter? It's not my litter, It's not my litter either. It's everyone's litter. It's not mine, But I'm picking it,
Just the other day, I was driving out of this street, and there was somebody actually picking up litter down at the bottom of the street. So maybe just decided to do the same. Maybe somebody said, "Well, if that's the way what we have to do, that's what we have to do."
We're the only council in Scotland where you can report on the My Glasgow app or phone up the council and say, "Come and take away my bed, my chest of drawers," and it doesn't cost.
I also have on my smartphone an app that is a direct link to Glasgow City Council, where I report not litter, but actual things like full bins. You can take a photo with a map. I believe it's called My Glasgow. You can literally take a photograph, pin your location on a map, and send a report direct to City Council. I do that on a regular basis, as does my wife, as does anybody else that I know that I meet and tell them about this app.
You put things on there and they're gone, sometimes the next day or in 48 hours. They have these special task force and they are moving out through the city to respond to reports on My Glasgow app, and you can even use Twitter to say, someone's just dumped, a chest of drawers on London Avenue.
We're going to be introducing a thing called a deposit return system for drinks cans and packaging, which will place a small fee, a deposit, when you're buying that item, that you get back when you return it to a special point where it will get recycled.
So it's designed to encourage behavioural change around that behaviour. We know from our evidence that it will increase recycling rates, but also have the added benefit of reducing littering across Scotland as well.
And that's a really important step that can make people realise that, or help people to realise there's value in the materials, in the packaging. When they're buying a product, it's not just the drink inside they are buying the packaging as well.
Another programme that we work on is, as I said, our litter prevention programme, and we support Scottish Government to deliver their national litter strategy towards a litter-free Scotland. And part of that, a big piece of work as part of that has been introducing the carrier bag charge for Scotland, and that has reduced carrier bag use significantly throughout Scotland. I think it's around 80%.
The Upstream Battle campaign is our ambitious marine litter campaign that is looking to tackle marine litter at its source. So whilst there are a range of other campaigns out there encourage people to clean up their beaches, to clean up the sea, what they're forgetting is actually that 80% of marine litter starts its life on land, and we need to tackle it at its source, so upstream. So the campaign looks at the Clyde Valley in its whole and entirety. So we're starting at Lather Hills, working right the way down to the Irish Sea. We're looking to raise awareness of the litter pathway that is from source to sea. So it's about cleaning up before it gets into the drains, before it gets blown into streams, to tackle marine litter before it gets to the sea.
People in Glasgow have got lots of ideas about how we tackle these issues, and a lot of people are doing something about it. So in Pollock Shields, there's a group formed that's looking at making a zero waste plan, working with the council, not doing it in isolation, but working with the council to make sure that they've got good services for disposing of their waste, that people know what to do, and making that information available to people in different ways.
You look at Gumtree, for example, and actually the increase of bartering groups. It's astonishing that in Glasgow there's brilliant bartering in Glasgow on Facebook, and it's so popular. It's an incredible number of people I've told about it, and they've just have exchanged so much, and it's high value stuff just for a token couple of pints of milk or something like this, just to kind of keep things going on a little bit more, so it doesn't go into landfill straight away. I think these things are really important, and it is growing. That's great.
There's a company called TerraCycle who specialise in recycling the things that other people don't recycle, so things like crisp packets and packaging materials that you currently just have to put into your general waste bin.
It's quite a complex picture of looking at what we do to prevent litter within the national park. We have a big group of volunteers that we work with, and these are kind of the bread and butter of our engagement across the national park. And these guys are out doing volunteer cleanups. We lead some, and sometimes they're out by themselves just doing their own thing, picking up litter and spreading the message that it's not acceptable to leave anything within the park. The other behind the scenes kind of work that we're doing is that partnership working. So working with local authorities, with national bodies like Zero Waste Scotland, to understand what challenges they face and how we can work together to solve those. Other elements of our work are working with school groups and young people who come to the park. So we have obviously a lot of people who come on educational visits, and it's part of our role to help them understand the context of the national park and what their behaviour does while they're here and how they can impact and make a positive change rather than a negative one.
I'd like to be going into the school when the school opens and they're kind of established, and just talk to the kids and say, what do you do with your sweetie papers? What do you do with your juice can or your water, your bottle when you finish drinking your water and all of that, and just try and be a kind of eco coordinator for litter, and I've spoke to Keep Scotland Beautiful, and they think that's a great idea, because they do have eco coordinators that do go into schools to educate kids on how to dispose of their litter sensibly.
It's quite positive seeing the young people going on climate strikes and then doing their bit in cleaning up the areas that they live in.
Partick Action on Litter have been staging monthly litter picks probably for the last 4 years. It was summer 2015, and it's a social activity. There's a hardcore of 6 to 12 of us. We wear our highly visible hot pink high-vis vests. We're a visible presence on the street. It's nice to get together. It's not so nice to pick up some of the ghastly rubbish that we have to pick up, but it's nice to meet one another.
We go out and say a Sunday is to make the place, to clean the place up originally or initially, but then again it maybe make people aware. Some people take leaflets out and hand them out if MD asks, for example. So to maybe make the community aware that they were doing it, maybe to do a wee bit themselves or join in with Partick Action and Litter.
I do think I enjoy most the social communal activity of being part of a litter picking group and realising that there are other people who do want to get involved and who do want to do things practically to make a difference, to make an improvement to the area and to everybody's life.
First Saturday of every month, a group of folk that are associated with Friends of the River Kelvin meet up somewhere along the banks of the Kelvin and do a bit of clearing up the banks along the Kelvin walkway or in the picnic spots, or particularly near where folk can get carry-out food and throw away their polystyrene food containers and pizza things. So we get geared up with our jackets so that if anybody falls in the river, they can see where they are. And we basically just fill black bags full of the rubbish that has either been washed down the Kelvin or people have dumped near the Kelvin.
We have about 80 active members at the moment, and our volunteering ebbs and flows. We've got a committee, then we've got our active membership, and then we've also got a big pool of volunteers.
Polish the Shields is the latest incarnation of a series of community initiatives which have taken various forms in at least the last 25 years.
This gentleman, James Alcock, has taken it upon himself to organise a monthly blitz of cleaning up around the area.
We're divided into 7 areas. There's 7 zones rather within Pollock Shields, and on a first Saturday of the month for an hour from 10 to 11 we go down, we get provided with grabbers and bin bags and gloves, and we spend an hour going around our particular zone filling bin bags. It's quite good fun. I mean, people are joking about whether one fast food outlet is going to beat another in terms of this one that is particularly prominent in terms of litter. And then at the end of it, there's coffee laid on. It's a nice chance to meet people. It's a real sense of actually people being concerned about the community. But then it's a real slap in the face when a day later there's rubbish everywhere and the council hasn't even come and emptied the bins that are full.
We're just collecting as much litter as we can within a time period, just keeping along by the river to prevent some of the litter going through the river into the sea.
And it's a nice way to spend the morning, actually, just picking up litter and kind of just doing your part to make a difference, I guess.
We found lots of lighter fluid and some alcoholic bottles, glass, general rubbish.
A lot of plastic.
Yeah, it kind of was lots of lighter fluid canisters sitting down by the river banks with lots of bottles and stuff so far.
There's bags, plastic, cups, wrappers, all lots of stuff, cans, lots of cans, alcoholic and otherwise.
Poo bags, dog poo bags. Obviously there didn't used to be many of those, but now there are lots of those that, great that people pick up the poo, but often they just chuck it. So up in Mary Hill, last year I once picked up, I stopped counting after 70 poo bags on one slope that hadn't been cleared for a long time.
It's one of these sort of rare, tangible things nowadays where you can actually go out and physically make a difference, and it's real, it's not virtual.
I would say, in all the cleanups, the people I know, they are certainly from the middle class.
What happens is you're getting people from over, say, this side, which is a bit more wealthy, affluent, mixing with folk from East Pollock Shields, and so it brings a kind of level of interaction that you maybe didn't have before, and I think that's really important, for this community, so it knows itself and it knows who who its neighbours are and what they do and, you know, that kind of thing. When you're out and you're visible and there's a lot of your community doing it, people who sort of look on in the street kind of think, oh, right, okay, who are these guys? And then, you know, so you also kind of recruit a lot of folk from, you know, oh, this is great, I didn't know about this, come along, you know, and so it sort of sends a message as well, you know, maybe people will think twice about dropping some litter.
Participatory budgeting is an idea that's been around quite a long time. There's places like Brazil where it's been quite commonplace for a number of years. But fairly recently it's gained popularity in Scotland. So some local authorities or very, you know, local areas have trialled various ideas around participatory budgeting, and that's really just getting the community involved in making decisions over how money is prioritised, how money gets spent within a budget.
It could be, in our case, that we could go and buy some more litter pickers, or, you know, maybe do some posters and that sort of thing. So it's a kind of, I guess the idea is it's a more bottom-up way of giving the responsibility to the community to make them, to give them the decisions, really. And I think that's important as well, because people who live in an area know mostly what the area needs.
If we had more funds, we would probably create some employment opportunities for volunteer coordinator, project manager, and really up our marketing and our on-ground activity, going into schools, talking to nursery schools, talking to primary schools and secondary schools. That's something that we do on and off, but because we're volunteer-led, it's really hard to keep up that consistency. And having that human resource to help us to go in, to bring younger people out into the environment, get them out, seeing what the impact they're making and also the positive impact they can make.
So members of the community go out, community cleanups, and I think it's really good, is to be encouraged. I really support those, you know, communities doing that. I get out as much as I can myself. My kids love going out with the litter picker. So that level of community action, I think, is brilliant. It's not, and it can't ever be the answer. It's a really good way of getting people involved and engaged in the issues, of raising awareness of the issues, and working with the council to try and get some solutions about those immediate issues. But if it's going to have an impact, it's also about getting people, maybe getting people angry or getting people worked up about the problem, and making sure that they put pressure on others, on governments, on the manufacturers of products, to make sure that they play their part too. Because it can't just be left to people in their own free time as volunteers, community members, to go out and clean up the streets.
If you get involved with the council, you can do things with them and just make a difference, and they will help you to make a difference.
In UK, we don't have that level of representation that you'd maybe get in somewhere like France. I think you get something like 100 citizens will have one councillor, whereas I think in Scotland it's something like 2,500 citizens per councillor. So again, there's an onus then, if you don't have that level of representation, there's an onus then on the local population to take a bit more responsibility.
Personally, I would be also looking to fast food outlets to see if there's some way of actually getting them to pay some kind of levy on their fast food, so that actually people say go in and pay, I don't know, £5 for a burger, but if they take their packaging back in, they get a couple of quid back. That's what I would think about.
The duty I have as a councillor, and I think the council as a whole, is to get behind those initiatives as much as we can, give them all the support they need so they can grow and be successful, but also don't lose sight of our responsibilities, but also don't lose sight of the need to make the producers and the manufacturers, who are really where the problem starts, to make them play more of their part and be responsible for the issue that they're helping to create as well.
I would like to see the companies that create the products that we consume actually having a circular waste cycle, so looking at crisp packets, milk cartons, bottles, plastic bags, also reducing the amount of plastic that is even just used to cover the produce that we buy would really help. So if that was removed in the first place, it wouldn't be out in the environment. And also if we look at alternatives, so can packaging actually be biodegradable, or can packaging be edible? So if you think of a sandwich, could you wrap it in something, rice paper, that you can actually eat and consume?
There was not enough pressure on an individual. Recently, the media has stressed like that many big companies are solely responsible for carbon dioxide increase, are responsible for producing this amount of tons of disposable plastic. But, excuse me, we are the ones who are driving the whole demand. Us as a user, as a customer, we are not without blame.
The most important thing is to stop making single-use plastic. It's a myth that recycling is the answer. A lot of common plastics can't be recycled, or can only be recycled once and then still end up in the landfill.
I think there's an education programme that's needed. I think we need to be saying to people to actually, we've got all these concerns about what's happening in our oceans. People have got to make the connection between what they throw away in the street and what ends up in the oceans.
In Scotland back in the 70s, it was quite acceptable to have a drink and get behind the wheel of your car. People don't do that anymore. They don't. You'll get your odd one that will do it, but by and large, it's regarded as socially unacceptable. More recently, smoking was banned in public places. Hue and cry what effect that was going to have, but now you'll see it. If you drive around, you'll see people standing outside their own house having a cigarette. So it's about changing people's attitude that it becomes socially unacceptable to drop litter, that you will actually go to some extent to actually dispose of your litter thoughtfully.
Blue Planet has reached an enormous amount of people, and I think it's a wider range of audience, a wider audience than other programmes might be of that sort of genre. So we're finding that, so since Blue Planet in 2017 came out, we've seen a massive rise in people doing beach cleans and marine litter picks. So that includes river and canals too. This year, as part of the spring clean, we saw a 90% increase in marine-based litter picks. So we're seeing a growing awareness of this problem and a growing appetite to tackle it too.
Yeah, I was recently rewatching Friends, and that's a really old series. And even then, I don't know how many years, or definitely more than a decade ago, there was Chandler saying, "Oh, those plastic spoons are really bad for the environment." It's like, oh my God, that was so old, so long ago, and they already picked up on that. Not sure what impact that made, but that's a very good point. Such subliminal messages should be probably incorporated in most of the shows that are produced these days. That might have an impact.
We are making a series of videos that we intend to distribute virally via YouTube. And we hope that we're going to try and put across a message in a comic way, and that will just... We find that comedy is a great method of communication in Glasgow, so we're trying to make comic videos that will remind people of the need not to drop rubbish wherever you want to leave it.
I remember watching a film on how they're recycling in Japan, and I was blown away by it. And then that's when I realised how much work we have to do in Glasgow to get to that level of recycling.
I had a year in Japan a long time ago, and in Japan, one Sunday afternoon every month, everybody came out to litter pick. And of course there's no litter in Japan really much, but they did it, and one person from every household came out.
Over a decade ago, there's this organisation that was established called Let's Do It, and you have thousands of people sort of committed to it as volunteers, as participants throughout the whole Lithuania, and they pick tons and tons of rubbish every single spring. It was like April time. Everyone gets out with their bin bag, with their gloves, and they just tidy everywhere. And it just took like wildfire.
Well, we're going to have to move away from a society around growth. We're going to have to reuse a lot more, live within our means, and we're going to have to move to other markers of or other aims for our society in terms of what it wants to be. You know, do we want to have a measure our society around health and well-being and, you know, effectiveness of our community rather than how much money our local economies making? And I think these things will all affect, and I think climate change will be the biggest factor in the next 50 years in how we shape policy, and that, you know, I think will have a knock-on effect of things like litter, and even in, you know, somewhere like Glasgow.
When people come here, we want them to have a real positive experience, to really feel like they connect with the environment and want to look after it and conserve it with us.
Although the damage to the environment is really bad, the meadow that we're standing next to now is living proof that the land can recover at this point. This site, this meadow here, Havoc Meadow and Bruce Hill Cliff, was actually a landfill site 40 years ago. It was a council tip. So as you can see now, it's the best place in southwest Scotland to see butterflies. It's teeming with wildflowers, birds and other insects. So if you take the litter away, the land will recover, and you can turn things around in quite a short space of time.
People are going to have to be a lot more sustainable. They're going to be growing food a lot more locally. I mean, just one of the parks down the road, an organisation's taken over the old glass houses that the council used to have, and is growing vegetables and things that will be for the local area to use. And all these things are going to become more and more important.
Get involved with a local community group. They're really not, you know, there's so many residents groups, housing associations, local community environmental groups, Green Space Scotland, and in Glasgow itself, Glasgow City Council has a list of those groups that you can volunteer with. Just think before you drop a piece of litter. Bring it home with you, put it in your recycling bin or your other waste, and also just think about what you're actually consuming in the first place. If you can influence one other person, that's the way great ideas spread. So get someone on board with you, go out with a friend, go out for a walk. Lots of our volunteers talk about how empowered they feel after they've come out for an hour and a half to do something in their local environment. When the world around them and the news they're reading is so gloomy, so it's about health and well-being, it's about getting out there, meeting people and making that impact.
But I think the thing that I've realised more than picking up the litter is it's more the tea and coffee and chat afterwards, is that it starts building a much stronger community, because, you know, we live in such individualistic ways, and we're all going off and doing our jobs, and that you don't often know who your neighbour is, especially in a city. And it's a way of building a sense of solidarity and pride with your community. And when you kind of go out, you know a lot more people. Just, you know, you go and get your shopping, and you know someone at the till, and so all that helps in building a stronger community.
The post-war ideal of living in a suburban society, isn't it? It's this idea of kind of living in a suburban environment where everything you've got is in that little box, you know, the car, the garden, etc. And if we're moving away from that to actually to a more holistic looking after each other in practical ways, I think it's going to be a great thing.
Ideally we wouldn't be here, and ideally we wouldn't need to have a campaign that focuses on tackling litter across Scotland. And hopefully, and then what we could actually concentrate on is we've got 2 programmes that are for community groups who do more than just litter picking. So they're planting bulbs, they're planting sustainably, they've got community food gardens. So actually what the next step would be then is to make it even more beautiful.